Now is always a good time to buy a house when you have a long enough perspective, right? It's always a good time to buy a house when you have a perspective that says, hey, 10 years from now, I mean, in American history, there's never been a period of time where real estate's been lower 10 years in the future than it is today. Does that make sense? It's always in every 10-year period of America, you can look back and say real estate is better than it was 10 years ago. And I don't see that changing. In fact, I see that getting even more pronounced over the next few years.
How has it changed since 2020, though? Because the entire market is flipped.
It's completely
Everything
flipped.
is different today.
Everything is different today. So interest rates are double what they used to be. And so for those who are unaware what that means, it basically means your payment is like double of what it used to be. So if you had a house that was, you're buying a $250,000 house and maybe your payment was, I don't know, let's call it $1,700 a month before, now you might be paying $3,000 a month, give or take. And that's a big chunk. But worse than that, or equally bad, to compound the effect, is prices are sometimes double what they were 4 years ago. So not only are, interest rates higher, which makes the payment higher, so is the property value, which makes the actual payment out of your pocket way higher. So the question, should you buy a house if you can afford it, would be my if you can afford it reasonably, a house would be a great investment long term.
Now, if I push back on that,
Please.
I'm looking around and I would love to buy a house.
Yeah.
But it seems like renting is so much cheaper.
Yeah.
That why would I spend, let's just call it, just for even numbers, $10,000 a month on a mortgage, property taxes, insurance, when I could rent the identical home for $5,200 a month?
Yeah, this goes back to perspective, right? If you were to own that house for 3 years, 100%, I would not buy a house. If you're going to live in there for 2 years, 1 year, probably not. But if you're going to own that house for 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, 20 years, you're going to make so much more than $10,000 a month on average over that time period, because that house that you bought for whatever, call it $1 million, is in 10 years from now is going to be worth, call it $2 million, maybe $2.5 million, maybe $3 million. The prices are going up, especially because we have just a massive housing shortage in America. So when you look at over a long period of time, this isn't getting better. It's getting worse for affordability.
Do you think that more houses will be built? Do you think the regulatory environment's going to get a little bit more friendly to real estate developers and that can kind of solve that issue a little bit? Or do you think that we're only going to get more tight, there's going to be more regulations, and it's going to be harder to build new homes?
Yeah, I mean, the government will have to do something, right? Like, here's the problem in a nutshell. What happened? Great Recession hit. Everyone lost, a lot of bad things happened. They stopped building from like 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12. Nobody was building anything. They started picking back up again, 12, 13, 14, 15, started, building, which is great. But when you're not building and more people are either coming to America and buying houses and, people are having kids and kids are growing up, there became a housing shortage. But what the second, I don't know what you call the second Great Recession, like 2000, we'll call it COVID.
Sure.
COVID happened. Everyone stopped building again. And it hasn't picked back up again. The only building being done is at the top of the market. In fact, Wall Street Journal had an article just out the other day. It just said there's a lot of apartments available. They're just for the rich people. There's almost nothing being built for the average American right now. So what does that mean? Again, supply and demand. So to answer your question, it's a tremendous problem. The government has to do something. Whether that, and we can debate this, and the government, they don't know what they're doing. So they can either reduce regulation and try to allow more building, which I don't see that happening. They can try to find a creative way to get more people into homes like California is doing right now with the ADUs, which is really fascinating. San Diego especially is wild right now. And you could do that, or the government could just start subsidizing Americans' rent. And I think it's going to be a combination of all three.
That would be insane if the government subsidizes people's rents, because that just means landlords are going to raise their prices
100%.
accordingly.
Yeah. So people are like, are you afraid of rent control? Are you afraid of like the government stepping in? Would you do Section 8? All those things. All the answers, yeah, of course I would love to have that. Like, I don't mind regulation. It just makes me richer. And what I mean by that is the more the money gets printed and pumped into the economy, landlords are usually ones that end up with the money. It's business owners and landlords get that money because it goes to the tenant. Fine, they pay the rent. Landlords raise the rent. We get more. It doesn't solve the problem, but that's how America likes to solve problems.
That's interesting because during COVID, when they printed all of the money, gave away all of this free money, you're right.
Yeah.
Like the people that received the actual stimulus checks and this and that just goes away like that.
Yeah, it flows right out.
You see the wealthiest people during that time period gained the most amount of wealth, like by crazy magnitudes.
Yeah. My wealth grew by tens of millions of dollars during COVID because my properties that I owned just went up in value because the rents went up because people. Yeah, it was a weird time. There was so much money in the economy.
Yeah. So there's the argument that home values really aren't going up. It's simply that the United States government is printing more money.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on that?
It's probably true. Like, in other words, if I had, my house is worth $1 million today. It's gonna be worth $2 million in 10 years. Okay, that's probably reasonable to say. But also, the gallon of milk was $4 today. It's going to be $8 then. So in other words, inflation is causing the housing to go up. That's for sure. But it goes back to the original point: is should you buy a house? Well, if you don't own the house, then now you still have nothing 10 years from now, and your milk is still $8 a gallon. So like you can argue whether it's right or wrong, or you can argue whether is it inflation? Is it just supply and demand? But regardless, if you own the asset, then you're playing with the game. You're not fighting against it.
And your payment is fixed, whereas
And your
people that
payment.
rent, their payment basically is at the whims of the market.
Yeah, I mean, it's fixed for as long as you get a good mortgage, which is super important. You get a fixed mortgage instead of a variable, which most people are pretty good with that.
Yeah.
Taxes and insurance, though, can kill people a little bit. If you're whatever, your taxes are at $10,000 a year, and then it bumps it up to $20,000 a year, your payment's going up by, almost $1,000 a month. That's real, but it's not, it's not going up by thousands of dollars a month. You're not going to be completely hosed if you own a house with a fixed mortgage.
Yeah. Now, for those unfamiliar with you and what you do, could you give us a bit of a backstory of how you got started in real estate?
Sure.
And in essence, almost what qualifies you to talk about this?
Yeah. All right. It begins with Cold Stone Creamery. You guys have that ice cream? Cold Stone?
Mhm.
Yeah. Great ice cream, right? So I was singing for tips. So they don't do that anymore, do they? Do they sing for tips?
It's been a long time since
I
I've
didn't
done
get
that.
sung to
Yeah,
when I went there.
Dude, yeah.
Really?
Back
You
in the
go, well,
day.
because you don't tip.
Yeah.
That's why.
So back in the day, you work at Cold Stone and you sing when somebody puts a tip, like, thank you for your dollar, listen to us holler. I don't know why I remember that one. So you sing for tips, and that was my job. I was making $8 an hour plus tips, averaged like $15 an hour. And I decided to rent this like 4-bedroom apartment, and then I rented out each of the bedrooms to just guys from the local college, which is, an experience in itself. But all of a sudden I was living for free. And so that's how I got into real estate. So just people know I did not come from money. My dad's a meat cutter. My mom did daycare in my house. Like, we were very like blue collar, lower middle class. But I discovered like, oh, this is cool. So anyway, I did that. I ended up buying a house, just like a house, and then rented out the bedrooms to a bunch of buddies. Did the same thing, lived for free. Then I bought a duplex. That was cool. Lived in one half, rented out the other.
Where'd you get the idea to do that?
It was kind of an accident, actually. I was bowling with some friends, and one of the persons I was bowling with, I said, hey, do you have a place I can rent? And she's like, don't rent, just buy. And I was like, but that's crazy. I'm 18 or 19 years old. Like, why would, and they're like, no, don't, just trust me. She's like, just trust me, buy, don't rent. So I did. And that's literally where the idea came from. And and all those houses that I then bought and rented out the bedrooms, not only did I make cash flow, but like they all went up in value over time. In fact, one of them I just sold, like that first duplex I just sold last year, and I made like about $100,000 over a decade, which is not a ton of money, but I only paid $80,000 for the property. And so anyway, that's how I got into it, is just scrappy, just trying. So we went from 1 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 10, 25, and today we're at a little over 13,000 across about 20 different states. There's a lot of in between there story, but that's the beginning and
And
end.
what about your involvement with Bigger Pockets? Because
Sure.
that's how I found you.
Yeah.
originally. It's through Bigger
Yeah,
Pockets.
Bigger pockets. So I remember my very first property I ever had that was in that house. And that's when I decided, like, I'm going to be a real estate guy. I'm going to buy real estate. So I remember telling my dad, I was actually studying for the LSAT, the LSAT, the law school entrance
Yeah.
test, right? I'm studying for it. And I tell my dad, hey, I'm actually not going to go to law school. I changed my mind. I'm going to be a real estate investor. And he's like, that's crazy. Like, why would, like, secure job, all that? And he goes, what are you going to do, Brandon, if the tenant doesn't pay rent? I was like, oh, shoot, I don't know. Like, I was like, you're right. Never mind. And I almost changed my mind. But what I did is I went to Google and I typed in, I don't think it was Google, Dogpile maybe. I'm like, whatever that old, before Google everyone used, maybe Yahoo, what to do when tenants don't pay rent. And this little tiny blog forum called Bigger Pockets pops up. And I don't remember what the answer was. I remember I printed it out, and I've had it for years somewhere in a file here. But I printed it out. But what it meant was there were answers to all those, like, problems. Like, when people are like, yeah, but you shouldn't do real estate investing because of ABC. Every ABC out there is an answer from somebody who overcame that and then made millions and millions of dollars. So it like expanded my mind to say, okay, well, maybe I can do this. So that's what got me into Bigger Pockets, actually. I was one of the very first signups on their website. I mean, it was basically just Josh Dorkin running in his basement. And I jumped in and started volunteering to edit blog posts for him. I was like, I can help out. Let me just edit blog posts. I pretended I was good at English and grammar, which I was not. That led to the podcast. And so I started the podcast alongside Josh. And then the podcast just took off and became the biggest real estate podcast. And like we were number 2 in the business category for almost a decade.
That's
It was
incredible.
Dave Ramsey and
Yeah.
us. And I was like, can never beat Dave.